Everyone, we're going to do some work with radicals. You should have viewed a video that I put into Google Classroom before you looked at this video. So all the information that's at the top of this page should have been given to you in the video. There's a little bit of room here where it says your notes here. You can take some notes from the video and put them in here. And what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to give you some examples that should help you to do some of the questions that are in this booklet. Okay, so the first one we're going to take a look at is the square root of -9. Okay, so remember that when you're looking for a square root, you're looking for two numbers that when you multiply them together will give you -9. Okay, so let's look at our options. We could go -3 times -3, okay, and -3 times -3 is 9, right, because a negative times a negative is a positive. Or you could have went 3 times 3 equals 9. But notice in both examples, -3 times -3 and 3 times 3, we get +9, not -9, okay? So there are no two numbers that are the same. That when you multiply them, will give you -9, okay? So that means that there's no answer, so we say no real solution, okay? All right, let's take a look at example number 2. Let's put a negative on the outside of the bracket this time, okay, so that we have negative and then square root 9, okay? So what that means, when you put a negative outside the bracket, it reads then -1 times the square root of 9, okay? And now we know that we have two numbers that when we multiply them together will give you +9 because we did that over here, okay? We know that 3 times 3 will give us 9. So really this question is -1 times +3, which will give you -3. Okay, third example. Let's say you have 4 and then bracket, okay, square root bracket, and then inside 30 minus -19, okay? All right, so first of all, putting a 4 in front of the bracket should remind you that that means to multiply, okay? Okay, so what the question is really asking you to do is go 4 times whatever is inside this bracket, all right? Now, when you minus a negative number, that means you are going to add, so it's really 30 plus 19 inside the bracket. And 30 plus 19 is 49. Okay, and the two numbers that when you multiply them together, that will give you 49 are 7. So the square root of 49 is 7. So really the question is asking you what is 4 times 7, and 4 times 7 is 28. Okay, so that should help you do the questions on the next page, at least for the first part, okay? So let's go down to number 66 and have a look at how we get the square root of x squared. Okay, so remember, what you want is what two variables this time that we're going to multiply together will give us x squared, okay? So what times itself will give x squared, okay? All right, so if you're thinking ahead, you would know that that would be x times x, right? Because x times x will give you x squared. Remember your exponent rules. If you have an exponent on a variable and you're multiplying them together, the variables together, so x to the 1 times x to the 1, you add your exponents, 1 plus 1 is 2, so you get x squared. Okay, so that means that the square root of x squared is equal to x. Let's say we have the square root of x to the 4. Okay, ask ourselves the same question, what times itself will give, and in this case, x to the 4. And you should say, well, the two things that when I multiply them together, that will give me x to the 4 would be x squared times x squared. I add my exponents, 2 plus 2, and I get 4. So the answer is that x squared times x squared is x to the 4. So the square root of x to the 4 would be x squared. Okay, let's do one more. Let's say you have the square root of x to the 6. What two things that when you multiply them together will give you x to the 6? Well, that would be x to the 3 times x to the 3. Okay, and you can, when you multiply your two powers that share the same base, you're going to go 3 plus 3 is 6. So you know x to the 3 times x to the 3 gives you x to the 6. So the square root of x to the 6 is x to the 3. Okay, shortcut for this. All right, shortcut. All right, if I want to get the square root of x squared, then I take the power inside the bracket, which is 2, and I divide it by the index. Okay, so I go 2 divided by 2 equals 1. So that means when I take the square root of x squared, I get x to the 1. Okay, let's take the square root of x to the 4. Same thing, the exponent on the x is 4 divided by the index, which is 2, gives me 2. So my answer is x to the power of 2, or the exponent of 2. And then let's take the square root of x to the 6. Take the power on the x, which is 6, divide it by 2, the index, and you get 3. So your answer is x to the 3. Okay? All right, so that should help you do the next few questions. Okay, and then when we go to the next page, we're going to be looking at cube roots. Okay, and once again, these were addressed in the video, so the only thing that I really want you to take a look at are the first 10 perfect cube numbers. So if we look at this, 1 is a perfect cube because 1 to the 3rd power gives me 1. Okay, 8 is a perfect cube because 2 to the 3rd power gives me 8. Okay, 27 is a perfect cube because 3 to the 3rd power gives me 27. And I'll do one more for you. 64 is a perfect cube because 4 to the 3rd power equals 64. Okay, and then you can go down the line. 125 is 5 cubed, 216 is 6 cubed, 343 is 7 cubed, 512 is 8 cubed, 729 is 9 cubed, and 1000 is 10 cubed. Okay, all right, so let's take a look at number 71. How could a factor tree be used to help find the cube root of 125? Okay, so let's figure out what the prime factorization of 125 is. Okay, well, we know that 5 goes into 125, and if you take out your calculator, you know it will go in 25 times, and you know that 5 goes into 25, and it goes in 5 times. Okay, so you know now that 125 is 5 times 5 times 5, which is 5 cubed. Okay, so another way of writing the cube root of 125 is to write the cube root of 5 to the power of 3. Okay, all right, and the question you ask yourself now is, what number, when I multiply it by itself 3 times, will give me 125? Okay, so what number times itself 3 times will give 125? Okay, and the answer, of course, is 5, right? Because 5 times 5 times 5 will give you 5. All right, So something to include in your notes here. The cube of a number and the cube root of the same number are inverse operations. Okay, so the cube root of 5 cubed equals 5. Okay, all right, so this cube root undoes 5 to the third power and it leaves you with 5. All right, okay, so let's go then to the next page. You're going to need your calculators for this. Okay, and I'm not going to be there to show everybody how to use their calculators, so I hope you are familiar with your calculator. I'm just going to use the one that I have on my computer. Okay, so our last two examples, we are going to be using a calculator to evaluate to 2 decimal places. Okay, so our first example is the cube root of 8 plus the cube root of 10. So for the cube root of 8, is there a number that when we multiply it by itself 3 times will give me 8? Or give you 8, and me 8 too. But the answer is yes, right? Because 2 times 2 times 2 will give you 8, so the cube root of 8 is 2. Is there a number that when you multiply it by itself 3 times will give you 10? And the answer is yes, but it's not a whole number. So we're going to use our calculator. And on this calculator, I'm going to use the Y root X button. The Y is the index and the X is the radicand. So I'm first going to type in my index, which is 3, and then I'm going to do my Y root X, and I'm going to put in my radicand, which is 10. So the cube root of 10 is 2.15443469. And because we are doing some questions, or you will be doing some questions where there's going to be some internal rounding, we may as well talk a little bit about it right now. Because the question is asking you to evaluate to 2 decimal places, with the work that you do in the intermediate steps, you want to have at least 1 extra decimal place than what they're asking for. So in our case, 3. So I want to round this off to 2.154. Okay. So the cube root of 10 to 3 decimal places, 2.154. Okay, so now I'm going to add 2 plus 2.154, and I get 4.154, which when I round off to the nearest hundredth, or 2 decimal places, is 4.15. Now, you can check your answer by typing the whole thing into the calculator. Okay, so I'm going to type in the cube root of 8 plus the cube root of 10 and see if I get what I think I'm going to get, which is 4.15, and sure enough you get 4.15. Okay, so you can see that your work is correct. And also, if you have one of those calculators where they show you what you're typing into your calculator, like this one here at the top right hand corner, you can make sure that you've typed it in correctly too. Okay, all right, so let's go to our last example, which is -3 times the square root of 12 minus the 4th root of 625. Okay, so -3 times the square root of 12. So for the square root of 12, are there 2 numbers that when you multiply them together will give you 12? Yes, but they're not whole numbers, so you want to use your calculator. So we go back to the calculator. I want to go -3 times the square root. My square root is over on the left, 12. Okay, and I get -10.39230,485. And once again, I want to think about internal rounding, so I want to round that off to the nearest thousandths, or 3 decimal places. So I'm going to put -10.392 and then minus. So Is there a number that when you multiply it by itself 4 times will give you 625? Well, there is, and you can use your calculator for it if you don't know what it is. So you want to find the 4th root of 625, and you get 5. Okay, so the 4th root of 625 is 5. And then we're going to complete our calculation. Negative 10.392 minus 5 will give you negative 15.392. Round off to the nearest 2 decimal places, so you get negative 15.39. And that concludes our lesson for today.